Hello, everybody. This is Yana Park of SpyPalm Partners. I'm standing in today for Matt Hardy, Program Director for Policy and Planning at AASHTO. Matt's on a plane today going from the AASHTO annual meeting back to DC and can't join us, but he's actually pre-recorded a brief presentation as one of our webinar speakers. So you'll be hearing from Matt virtually in a few minutes. To all of you on the line, welcome. This is actually our webinar 40 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series sponsored by Federal Highways and AASHTO. We've presented webinars in this series every 2 months, going back to 2012, on a variety of topics related to asset management. Today, we'll be changing up our usual format a little bit. We're going to share some of the highlights from the recent TRB conference on performance and data in transportation decision making. In our last webinar back in August, we took a look at TAM implementation. It was an informative session. I encourage you to look it up on the AASHTO TAM portal. There you'll find more information on this webinar series. Just visit tam-portal.com and click TAM events in the main menu. You can also register for upcoming webinars as they're announced. You will also find archives of all of the previous webinars, links to both videos and the slides from today's webinar will be posted on the site, as well as finding any of the past webinars. You'll find both the videos and the slides. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar Q&A feature. We will answer all of the questions during our Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And so we're looking forward to your input in the Q&A forum. And now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Gay of Federal Highways for a brief welcome and intro on behalf of our co-sponsor, Federal Highways. Steve.
Thank you, Yana. FHWA, in cooperation with AASHTO, is very pleased to sponsor this valuable webinar series. We're proud to be presenting our 40th webinar today, and we're looking forward to many more to come. This series is first and foremost an opportunity to share practical, useful, timely information with the asset management community. Today, we're taking a look at the TRB conference on performance and data in transportation decision-making held just last month in Atlanta from September 15th to 18th. There's certainly a lot to cover with 120 presentations in 34 sessions over 4 days. The conference was a learning opportunity for all of us lucky enough to attend. And our speakers today are going to share their perspectives and some of the key lessons they took away. A couple of lessons I took away. So asset management and performance and how we're using that data. And there's a data given us as asset management practitioners. Everything we want is, do we need more? Do we need better quality? All sort of questions were coming to my mind. I believe this will help us understand some of the opportunities to follow up, learn more, and continue to advance practices. To help support that process, FHWA is providing support for development of an e-circular summary of conference presentations and discussions. You can expect to see that published on the TRB website early next year. In the meantime, today's webinar provides an informal summary. We want to share these highlights with the broader TM community as quickly as possible. I want to cover a couple items to address questions I received just focused on asset management. Based on a quick review of the 52 TAMs that were due on August 30th, this is the breakdown we have. I know a number of states have asked us this, and I'll certainly say from what the regulations say, state DOTs are encouraged to include additional assets in their TAM. This is what we captured out of this the ones that were due in August 30th, 2019. 34 had just the NHS pavement and bridges, 18 had all the state-based pavement and bridges, and that's a breakdown of the other assets. I guess of the one asset that the most states address with the ITS, with California, Connecticut, Minnesota, Nevada, and Utah. And next slide, please. I just want to address a couple of timeline issues. One, we know the certification, recertification. If there's changes in the processes, the state DOTs need to ask for recertification, but realizing if at a maximum time to the next certification will be due in 2022, which is about 2 years, 9 months from now. There have been some questions. It said every 4 years. Does that make it from 2018 or 2019? It's 4 years from 2018. So the next submittal of the TAMP and the processes for recertification will be in 2022. There's been also questions. We just did the consistency determination. When does that happen again? That's undertaken annually, so not later than June 30th, 2020. In each year thereafter, the state DOTs are to submit documentation to demonstrate implementation of the TAMP, which is less than 9 months away. With that in mind, I know, some states had some issues with the 5 work types or the funding management systems, and we had the states explaining extenuating circumstances with that for this TAMP consistency determination for 2019. The extenuating circumstances only apply to 2019, so you should be working on addressing those or other issues that the Federal Highway Division Office and you all discussed, so that next year, 2020, we no longer have the extenuating circumstance scenario. Next slide. Just a couple items. As you recall, we had a presentation about a year ago about the results of the review of the initial TAMP processes. We will be sending out to the Federal Highway Division offices individual state reports in the next couple weeks. The Federal Highway Division office will be sharing that with you. And we're also in the process of setting up some peer exchanges, looking at dates, etc. So if you're contacted, Federal Highway is planning on holding peer exchanges over the coming months. That's happening. I don't think we can address it. I might get all the states this first time around, but we'll have to see how that all plays out. Next slide, please. But I think you're all going to enjoy today's presentation, and I hope you all learn a lot this afternoon. I'm certainly looking forward to it. And on that note, let me pass it back to Yana. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Now, as Steve mentioned, the purpose of the webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community. For this webinar, the primary learning objectives are building working knowledge of key concepts and definitions relevant to transportation asset management and TAM decision-making, beginning to apply this knowledge to better understand TAM decision-making in the context of TAM data and systems, transit state of good repair, TAM research, and capacity building, and of course, to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge. For the agenda today, Matt Hardy has pre-recorded our first introductory presentation. In our second presentation, we'll hear from Matt Hobrecht from the Iowa Department of Transportation. Following Matt, we'll have Jordan Holt from WMATA, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. Lastly, we'll have Bob Hazlett of the Maricopa Association of Governments, who will wrap up our presentations for this webinar. Just another reminder, please submit your comments or questions using the Q&A feature of the webinar control panel anytime during today's presentation. And of course, again, we'll make the slides and video available after today's webinar at tam-portal.com. And you can also, on the handouts page, you can download the webinar, a PDF of the webinar slides. All right, so now let's get started with our introductory presentation from Matt Hardy, Program Director of Policy and Planning at AASHTO.
Program Director for Planning and Performance Management at AASHTO. I'm happy to sort of give an overview and highlight some of the more sort of higher level aspects of the TRB Conference on Performance and Data and Transportation Decision Making that took place in Atlanta back in September. I was one of many that served on the planning team for this, so big thanks to all those who participated in the overall planning. Next slide. Wanted to just provide an overview of how the program sort of came together. It was, four different sort of pillars or four different areas that we tried to focus on. The first one being plenary and lunch sessions, which provided all conference attendees with sort of an overview. Plenary sessions, topics of interest to everybody. That helped to sort of provide a higher level discussion, examples of what the different concurrent presentation tracks took place or talked about later on. So the first pillar being the plenary and lunch sessions. We had two really good lunchtime speakers, and we had two plenary sessions. We had four different concurrent tracks, the presentations, the technical presentation, and sort of little mini workshops and mini peer exchanges were focused on. We also had a number of TRB and AASHTO committee meetings, including the Performance Management Committee. And then we had a poster reception and more a social sort of dine around that took place. So it was a jam-packed program over 3 or 4 days, depending on when you arrived, with a lot of information being delivered. Next slide. Under the tracks, this was sort of the heart and soul of the overall conference. There were 4 tracks focused on multimodal planning, performance and data, programming and investment prioritization, and then communications and stakeholder engagement. So you can see that asset management is not called out specifically, but there were a number of sort of presentations, discussions, and everything that took place in each of these 4 tracks that was very much related to asset management as well as performance management. It was I think a really sort of good structure because many of the things that we talk about within asset management, either being data, information, the culture, the people, workforce development, it was talked about in some way in one of these different tracks. What I wanted to focus on today were some highlights from not the individual tracks, because the other presenters that we have on the webinar today are going to focus on those. But what I wanted to sort of focus in on are some of the key lessons, insights, or interesting examples from the plenary and lunch sessions. So the other thing to note is that all of these presentations and some of the snapshots of the slide that I'll be showing are available in the overall program. So if you Google the title of the conference and go to TRB's website, you can actually download all of these presentations and kind of look at them at your leisure. So the first one that I wanted to highlight was the first plenary session that we had on Monday morning, and it included 5 different sort of agency leaders talking about how performance and data are helping to sort of drive innovation and to sort of drive how their agency operates. And I wanted to focus on Russell McMurray from Georgia DOT was on there, gave a really nice presentation about how they're using data, performance measures, performance management, asset management to help improve the overall efficiency and operations of their agency. And I thought one of a good example that he provided was how they're using information to inform traveling motorists about when to travel and when not to travel. So what you see here on the GDOT slide is a graphic that they put together to better communicate with traveling public about when to travel and when not to travel over the Thanksgiving holiday. We all know that Wednesday can be a really bad day to travel. Thursday might be better, and then coming home Friday and Saturday. So they kind of put together some information slide that was disseminated to the motor public via the website, to news agencies, outlets, and that sort of thing, to get the word out about when to travel and when not to travel, to try to help manage overall demand. Russell again was one of 5 speakers that we had for that plenary session that kind of opened up the conference. Trish Hendrick from the 95 Corridor Coalition was the moderator for that. We had a number of great questions from the audience. Again, all that information is available to you on the summary of the program that TRB put together. We go to the next slide. The lunchtime speaker for that day was Keith Parker, and Keith was used to be the executive director or the chief executive officer for the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, or MARTA, and he recently went over to become the president and CEO of Goodwill of North Georgia. But when he came into MARTA, MARTA was in some trouble, basically, and he was able, through data, through information, he was able to bring MARTA out of that sort of hole that was dug previously. And MARTA is now recognized as one of the most innovative transit authorities in the nation. And because of his efforts, Keith was recognized by AASHTO and Metro Magazine for his ability to sort of transform that agency through the efficiencies, implementation of cost-effective measures, and to engender a culture of innovation and diverse environments. So that's a picture of Keith there. And if you go to the next slide, one of his sort of big takeaways in terms of getting MARTA back on track, so to say, there were sort of 3 aspects. One was to identify and address challenges. The second one was to recruit and retain the top talent. And the third one was to prioritize innovation at every level of the organization. And I think those are sort of 3 key takeaways that we can sort of see with asset management as well, that we're trying to identify and address the asset management challenges. We have concerns about recruiting, retaining, educating workforce development when it comes to asset management. And then how do we sort of engender or impress upon innovation and everything within the asset management program within a transportation agency. So that was Keith's presentation. Again, really good presentation, really good information on how he really transformed MARTA to a really sort of top-notch transit agency within the U.S. And if we go to the next slide, this is sort of a couple snapshots from some presentations that took place during the plenary on Tuesday morning. The one on Tuesday morning really focused on how data and data change how an agency operates, or how an agency is structured. So we had 4 different presentations. We had somebody from Maryland DOT, we had Tim Henkel from Minnesota DOT, we had Nebraska DOT represented, and then we had Michael Tack from the University of Maryland Cat Lab, so to give that non-agency perspective about how data might be changing the way agencies look at their operations, look at their overall structure. One of the snapshots from the Maryland Department of Transportation, they gave a great presentation. I would encourage you to go look at it and download it. They talked about Project Greenlight, where they're trying to get ideas, innovative ideas from their employees to try to implement within their agency. And Samantha sort of looked at gave some examples of some really good ideas. One of those being, what are we trying to pursue at the Maryland Department of Transportation, the State Highway Administration, where she works. And from that data perspective, what they're trying to do is look at centralizing. They have a sort of centralized data management. You add on to that dedicated data analysis groups, and what you have is sort of a new, sort of a shifting structure and culture when it comes to data within the overall agency. Again, download the presentation, good information in there. If you're an agency sort of looking at data and what might data be doing to my agency, I think she has some sort of really good insights about what they're trying to do. If you go to the next slide, the last one that I want to highlight is one that Michael Pack delivered. He had a great presentation, again, talking about how, different ways of thinking about data, how the agency might be changing when it comes to data. I can't do it justice in terms of what he talked about, but one of the slides that really stuck with me was how we have to deliver the message. And the idea that our job is not to actually present the data, because we can do that very easily, right? We have many different tools out there, ranging from the most basic Excel graphs to some very more complicated, innovative web-based applications like Tableau. But what we're not trying to do is just to present that data. Our job, or your job as as part of the agency, is to actually tell a story. What is that data saying? What's the story behind it? What does it mean? How do we use it? So I thought that was sort of an insight, maybe not the most, I think just sort of a good insight, one that might be obvious, but one that I think we really need to emphasize, that it's just not about showing data, showing information, but going to the next step, which is actually tell the story of what that data means, what that information means. And if we go to the last slide, what I'll sort of close with is that there was a question through a sort of an active poll about what do you know now that you didn't before. So here is sort of a word cloud in terms of what did people learn during this conference. You see the big one there is governance. Talked a lot about data governance, a lot about performance, the issues, project selection, equity. Lots of presentations about prioritization. Not to mention the scooters. I think that was one of the running sort of humorous themes throughout it, was the idea of scooters and if they're going to take over our cities. But we kind of played that up a little bit. But it was we had those more serious. We have data science, data analytics, and how is data and performance really going to affect the overall operations or performance of an agency. So with that, I will stop. I will conclude. And again, thanks for letting me talk a little bit. Hopefully this was useful. And thanks again.
All right. I guess we all want to know what Alan Alda has to do with the conference, but we'll get that answered from one of the next speakers who might remember. Our next presentation, we'll hear from Matt Hobrecht. Matt is the Transportation Asset Management Administrator at the Iowa DOT. Matt currently serves as the chair of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management and is a member of the TRB Asset Management Committee. He has been involved in numerous national conference planning committees and NCHRP panels. Matt's career experience is primarily in the field of data analytics. He's been with the Iowa DOT since 2010. And with that, I will hand it over to Matt.
Thank you, Jana. I hope everyone can hear me all right and see my screen.
Yes.
Good. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to present here, and thank you for the nice introduction. I do want to acknowledge I'm going to be presenting some highlights here. And I am not Superman. I wasn't actually able to attend all of the concurrent sessions when there are 4 sessions going on at the same time. So I did rely on the kindness of many other folks to help me identify highlights that should be brought forward, and I also utilize the slide decks that have been referenced earlier that are available from the conference website. And so I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at those. And for anyone who does download the slide deck from today, I have tried to include links to all of the relevant presentations in my slides. So you should be able to track down those presentations if you wish to know more than what I will present here today. But with that, let me go ahead and kind of jump in. One of the things that I kind of wanted to start out highlighting were some of the MPO findings. I work for the state DOT. And I am not generally directly involved with a lot of our MPO work. And so for me at a conference like this, to be able to see what some of the MPOs are doing related to asset management and performance management was quite interesting. So I'm going to highlight a few great examples. These are three that kind of stuck out to me, but that there were many, many other examples presented during the conference there in Atlanta, and would encourage you to check out the slides for any further information that you might wish to seek. Jumping directly into the first presentation, I'll highlight, it was one by Teresa Rommel from MTC, that's the San Francisco Bay Area MPO. And this is just an example of a slide from her slide deck, but they're continuing to advance how they are using the pavement condition data to help support transparency and accountability in project selection. So they're looking at how, not only kind of what is the condition of our assets, but how have the local agencies that are under the MPO actually doing in terms of maintaining their pavement condition and applying preservation treatments. So I thought that was a very interesting way of using data and information. Another kind of takeaway for me that was interesting was noting how some of the MPOs have started to leverage the use of the PM2 measures. I think probably most folks in the webinar are familiar with the FHWA performance measure TPM initiatives and resulting from MAP 21 and the FAST Act implementation. And as we look at particularly the PM2 measures, which are related to pavement and bridge condition or infrastructure condition, those have, I think, largely been viewed as sort of DOT measures. So I thought it was very interesting to see how the MPOs are starting to incorporate some of those perspectives, particularly with respect to the NHS facilities, as they look at their own sort of project prioritization and scoring rubrics. So I've had examples from both the Orlando MPO as well as the El Paso MPO that are using that kind of information in their scoring. And of course, these were not the only examples that were presented, but these are two that kind of stuck out. So on the topic of kind of project selection, project prioritization, a lot of the DOTs also presented information on how they're implementing performance-based planning and programming. That's what that PBPP stands for. So it's performance-based planning and programming. And a number of states have experienced legislative impacts where their states have enacted laws to kind of push them towards more of a data-driven prioritization process. Others have just done this kind of as a best practice. And so I'm going to highlight a few of the presentations, including those 6 that I'm showing on the screen here today. So, and by the way, this is where the hyperlinks are. So if you want to go dig further into those slide decks, you would go to this page and click on that link, and it should take you right to that slide deck. I'll start out first by highlighting a presentation by by a fellow from the Arizona DOT. They're using a formula which is part of kind of related to a legislative mandate to look at how they're allocating funding to various projects and sort of scoring and prioritizing those projects. And you can see here that they're including categories like pavement preservation, bridge preservation, modernization, and expansion. But I think one kind of interesting piece of this is, as you look at that expansion item, you can see that the funding is currently set at $0 per year. So apparently they're not focused on any kind of expansion at this point in time, or not able to accommodate that within their priorities. And certainly the funding pots give you a sense of kind of what the priorities are for Arizona today. The next example I'd like to highlight would be the KTC, Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's SHIFT program. And they had a number of different components of this, but one that was focused on asset management was utilizing information that they collect to help them look at pavement improvements, other improvements related to system condition, infrastructure condition that they would then use to help prioritize projects. Another interesting example came from Massachusetts DOT. And they're really looking at kind of a multimodal perspective. And I thought one thing that really resonated with me was looking at this idea. The top item on the slide that I've captured here is focused on system preservation. And it talks about how they're using state of good repair, and so that's kind of a way that they can look across modes and look at state of good repair, not only within the highway system, but also across into transit systems and other systems that they allocate funding to. So this idea of state of good repair as a kind of a performance measure, I think was one that I thought was very interesting. Next, I'll highlight an idea presented by Texas DOT and Peter Smith, and he talked a little bit about how Texas is using some advanced multi-criteria decision analysis tools to help them look at many different factors as they're thinking about their project scoring and prioritization. But in particular, they're using pavement, bridge data, as well as other data sources to help them look at the performance of their assets and the relative to the projects that are being proposed and what the improvements would be, how that would then fit into an overall scoring system to think about prioritizing those projects relative to the type of improvement that is being proposed. Next example that we saw came from the Minnesota DOT. Here they showed some examples of a new project scoring system. And then I'm showing on the screen here this example of a pavement, NHS pavement project scoring rubric. And one of the things I thought was very interesting about this is that the majority of the points for these pavement projects are coming from the timing of the improvement. So I thought this was a great way to kind of help move us away from a worst first type of approach, where we're really looking at the timing of the treatment, whether or not that treatment is occurring at the right point in the life cycle of that asset. And that's a huge influence on the overall scoring of that project. So I thought that was a very innovative way to think about kind of pushing this idea of let's get these treatments applied to the right assets at the right time. Lots of other great information in the MnDOT example, but that was a big takeaway for me. Another one that I thought was great and definitely worthy of highlighting was what Vermont Agency on Transportation is doing relative to looking at kind of project scoring and coming up with this idea of an efficient frontier. And this, for those of us that have been around kind of pavement and bridge management systems, this is not necessarily a new idea, but I think it's very interesting to kind of apply it across a portfolio of all different projects and think about what is that portfolio delivering in terms of the value across all of those different assets relative to their cost. And there is kind of this concept of an efficient frontier, essentially, whereas we really are getting maximizing our benefit per cost and looking for those points at which we have that optimal portfolio of projects. We would, like in the example shown on this slide, we would only want to pick the portfolio of projects corresponding to kind of those blue diamonds. And anytime we would pick something that's kind of in the red area there, that would be sort of suboptimal from a benefit cost analysis perspective. So I think that was an interesting application beyond sort of I'll call them silos of pavement and bridge, kind of thinking more portfolio wide. Kudos to VTrans for looking at that. I'm going to highlight a few other presentations that really related to sort of how data is being used, or the ideas of data and data governance are being used or applied to in an asset management context. Obviously, these ideas of like data governance, data management are much bigger than just some of the asset management perspectives within our agencies, but they certainly have application as we think about asset management and the importance of data to help drive our decision making. First example I want to give is one from Wood, and Richard Bodai talked about a case study looking at the benefits of a data governance strategy and sort of how that related to the implementation of an enterprise transportation asset management system. So this particular case study was looking at this implementation and of an enterprise asset management system and kind of underscoring the benefits of having a good data governance structure in place to help make that project successful and vice versa. Next, I'll highlight an example from Michigan DOT. This is actually presented by Gareth McKay from WSP. And he talked about how the Michigan DOT is taking a new look at their framework for maintenance prioritization and really looking at asset condition information and providing a data-driven approach to how I'm getting a net message that says my screen sharing is paused. Okay.
Still looks good on our side.
All right. That was weird. Sorry about that. But this I thought was an interesting kind of direct approach towards looking at maintenance and looking at how do we prioritize the work that we're going to do within maintenance, especially if we're doing sort of contract maintenance, and prioritizing that work to get the best bang for our buck relative to expectations. Another example to highlight, this goes back to the MTC for which is the MPO in the Bay Area, and looking at their pavement management approach. And I thought what was really there was a second presentation presented by Sui Tan there, and I think those of us that have attended past asset management conferences have had the opportunity to see Sui present some of the fantastic work that their MPO has been doing on collecting and harmonizing kind of pavement data across the board. And it's amazing to see how far they're coming each time we see a new presentation from them, seemingly every year. And I really like to see how they're looking at this idea of efficiency and how they're looking at pavement preservation and trying to really promote the idea of being efficient and how we are allocating funding towards pavement preservation to help us get the most bang for our buck. Another example, in his presentation, Dr. Hardy talked about the Maryland FHWA or Maryland DOT's presentation on data, and I pulled this slide out of that presentation. I thought this was very pertinent for asset management, really helping us think about how we can use data and a sort of data-driven perspective to help us get better insights into the decisions that we're making and making sure that we're getting the right data into the right hands at the right time to optimize our decision making and get our book of assets the most life that we can for the least cost. I'm going to cheat a little bit and actually present one of my own slides from a presentation I gave. And this is actually a slide that I didn't get time to make because I present because I had a little bit too much content in my slide deck. So I am going to actually give you a bonus that nobody at the conference even saw. So this slide kind of highlights the scoping and prioritization tool that we've built here at Iowa DOT, which is heavily leverages our investment in our LRS to bring together a robust set of data sources across all kinds of things related to how we scope and prioritize projects, everything from looking at wetland sites and endangered species and planning levels and all kinds of information that's really critical for folks to have at their fingertips as they're starting to scope out a project. And then that directly leads to a prioritization where we look at what is the criticality in that area related to things like pavement and bridge condition, but also traffic, safety, mobility, freight, many factors kind of fold together to look at how we would prioritize that project for future development. Not necessarily for funding, but just for the development phase and getting us to that point. And then the last one I wanted to kind of highlight here is comes out of this right sizing report, which is part of the NCHRP project 19-14. I think that there's some interesting lessons or ideas presented here in terms of thinking about how data can give us some different perspectives on how we would kind of maintain our book of assets by looking at all different types of actions that maybe are not kind of our normal investment decision actions, and thinking through how that could impact our overall mix of fixes that we are using to maintain our assets in a state of good repair. So some I think some interesting information. I know that report is still not, or is sort of still in the publication process, or I believe it is anyway. But it was interesting to sort of see this as a pre-publication presentation, and I'm looking forward to seeing that final report once it's completed through the TRB process here. I think it's in the final stages, so that should be coming very soon. But definitely something to look forward to. That's all the slides I wanted to highlight here today. I do want to, again, thank those that contributed in terms of ideas of sessions or presentations that they saw that are worthy of highlighting. There are certainly many other presentations, and as I said, I didn't get a chance to see them all, certainly, as there were those concurrent sessions going on, but it was a great conference, a lot of good content, and I definitely encourage for anyone who's interested to seek more, to seek out the slide decks, or contact someone maybe from your agency who might have had the opportunity to attend the conference. So that's all I have today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. We'll now hear from Jordan Holt. Jordan is the Director of Performance at WMATA, also familiar to many of you as DC's Metro. She's a member of the AASHTO Transit Asset Management State of Good Repair Standards Working Group and was on the planning committee for the TRB Conference on Performance and Data in Transportation Decision Making. Jordan has worked in performance management for 15 years after beginning her career as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kazakhstan, where she taught English and economics in 2 high schools. Okay, Jordan, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, yeah, I'm Jordan Holt. I am the Director for Performance at the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. I've worked here about 5 years, and I was on the conference planning committee, one of many for this TRB conference on performance and data in transportation decision making. Just to step back a bit, first a bit about transit. You know, we have the industry has kind of been experiencing a bit of a challenge. We have declining ridership. I am pleased to say, though, at Washington, D.C.'s Metro, that decline has stabled, and we had actually a slight increase in ridership last fiscal year, so that's good news. But overall, ridership generally is down in transit across the United States. You know, we have an aging asset base. Metro, where I work, is 40 years old, but it's well documented across the industry that, you know, we have a large backlog in terms of buses and rail guideway and trains that need to be repaired. In fact, industry-wide, several years ago, it was $90 billion. I know FTA is in the midst of updating that number. And as you know, the people in the highway world, similarly to the transit world, we are about 3 years into an federally mandated asset management program. And you know, that requires us to know what we own and its condition, set state of good repair targets for common KPIs, and develop plan to manage assets and prioritize investments. So we're kind of getting our hands around what asset management is, and I think many agencies now, for the first time, do have comprehensive inventories and condition data, and are starting to figure out how to use that. At the conference, I'd say transit was fairly well represented. We had, I don't know, several staff from WMATA were there. The DC Metro, we had LA Metro. We had Keith Parker, former head of MARTA, as Matt Hardy told us about. We also had Sound Transit, King County Transit, Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. You know, we had 3 sessions solely focused on transit. That was great to see. One about how transit agencies are revamping their data analysis to make collaboration with cities and MPOs more effective and efficient and measurable. We had another one where we focused on how transit agencies are using data to really improve operations, about kind of speeding up buses and all of that. And then we actually had one focused solely on WMATA, and it was about how we've kind of had a comeback story, how we've really invested in state of good repair. We had a multi-year safe track program, and then since then, work we've been doing to kind of improve how we manage our assets. And so that one was called Fostering Employee Accountability for Agency Performance. We also had LA Metro present on its project selection process, and the Port Authority presented on its integrated analytics platform, and Sound Transit presented on an interagency scorecard. So if any of those sound interesting to you, I encourage to visit the website and download the presentations. I saw many of them and they were great. But I wanted to highlight today, I think, 3 takeaways that are really kind of resonated with me in terms of being someone who works on asset management in a transit agency, but I think are also broader for kind of the broader transportation agency field as well. The first is data is an asset. And, you know, I heard several people say this at the conference, that data utilization is just as important as asset utilization. And to me, this resonated in part, as I mentioned, we've struggled to get good quality data on our inventory and the condition of it. And now that we have it, you know, it's really encouraging people to use it. And it's just as important, you know, we're very used to using all of our physical assets, but using our data to drive these decisions, particularly asset management decisions, I feel is incredibly important and something that we're getting better at, but we're, I'd say, kind of still in the beginning phases of as an industry. And here, you know, we heard a lot about BI, business intelligence, and data governance, and how those can remove barriers to utilization. One of my takeaways was that I think we've kind of hit a critical mass in these areas. We had, you know, quite a few sessions where these topics came up, and, you know, when participants raised their hands about, you know, whether they had formal programs in these areas, it was at least half of the people in the room. So it's kind of, these are ideas that are taking hold. And, you know, another similarity to asset management is I heard over and over that both BI and data governance really required strong executive support to take hold. And then there was a lot of discussion also about how to measure kind of the return on investment of investing in BI and data governance. And in my mind, that's also, it's very similar. I feel like I get in lots of conversations about, well, you know, this trade-off between investing in state of good repair, replacing kind of old assets or aging assets or poor condition assets, and kind of investing in shiny new things. And, you know, investing in the old is often not as exciting as kind of other things, just like investing in BI and data governance isn't. Really, the focus of these is about getting data and intelligence in the hands of the people, the right people to make decisions. And I like to think of data governance as a way to keep data in a state of good repair. One that also resonated with me was someone mentioned to own up to data errors. You don't want to stick with numbers that are wrong. And I see this as we've continually, I think, in asset management, working to improve our inventory and condition data, recognizing that as things change, we should update our projections, update our methodology, update our decisions, that it's okay to recognize that maybe we had made some mistakes or didn't have complete information in the past, and that we need to kind of continually be working to improve and adjust. And then there was a robust discussion about leasing versus owning data. And here it's about kind of outsourcing data ownership and management, and as well as should some of the kind of newer technologies like cell phone data or sensor data that are being installed on kind of public infrastructure, should that data remain private, or should we make it public? And I find that interesting. That's kind of, in my mind, a new frontier of data that we can use to drive asset management decisions. And I think this debate over who owns it will have an impact over how that data then is used, and how well integrated it is into decision making. My second takeaway was that common KPIs are opportunities. I think Matt Hardy brought up this, that you know, really the point of data is storytelling, and one thing that Michael Pack said is a good performance measure is like a really good movie. And I can tell you, as a performance management professional, I'm a little torn on this one. Everyone loves a good comeback story, and, you know, you can often see that through a KPI or a performance measure. You know, I can tell you from WMATA, you know, a few years ago, we were in a pretty bad place in terms of service reliability. where our on-time performance was at 70% of our trains were on time, and now we're up to about 88, not consistently 90 on most weekdays, which is great. So we can tell that story with data. It's awesome. But honestly, I would rather almost have a boring story where we're always at 90, 95%, and that's great. So I don't know if that boring bit makes a really good movie, but I can agree that kind of a big improvement could be a great story. But on this, I know that FTA and FHWA have established kind of common asset management performance measures or KPIs. And I was encouraged by how, I think MTC was brought up in the prior presentation about how they're using these types of common measures to drive performance and drive decision making. And so it's great to think about these as opportunities rather than just compliance activities or something we have to do. And really, they provide the opportunity for us to talk about impact and condition using the same language, impact of investments using the same language. Sound Transit had an example where they worked with other transit agencies in the Seattle region to develop kind of common performance measures, and they've used them to develop an interagency scorecard. So where they have to work together or working towards common goals, they use these measures to evaluate kind of a collective impact of their projects. And I found that really interesting. And then finally,
Jordan, I'm sorry to break in. We've had a request from the audience. Could you close your control panel? There seems to be a software glitch that's making it show up on the screen.
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
Oops.
Or sorry, the GoToWebinar control panel.
Did that work?
Let's see. Worked great. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you. Yeah, and then common KPIs are great opportunities for benchmarking too. I know in the transit industry, the FTA is about to release kind of for the first time, we'll have comparative asset management or asset inventory and condition data for transit agencies. And I know there's a lot of hand-wringing about that, about worries about how we'll compare to other agencies, but I think it's also looking at it as an opportunity for benchmarking. When you see another property performing better than you are, you can look to them and ask, hey, what are you doing and what can we emulate? And finally, kind of my third takeaway was about the Keith Parker quote. It was, don't forget the customer and employee. So I think Matt Hardy also brought this up. He said, Keith wrote, take care of your employees, take care of your customer community, and financial health will follow. That was his big advice to the group. And so I see that as thinking not just about asset condition when driving decisions about where to make investments, but thinking about what level of service do we need from our assets to meet customer expectations and what other factors should be considered. I heard a lot about trying to figure out how to include goals of equity and social inclusion. I found that pretty interesting when thinking about evaluating kind of the impact of different investment portfolios. Finally, I just wanted to close a bit with a bit of advertisement about work that the AAPTA State of Good Repair Transit Asset Management Working Group has been doing. It's a group of about 20 professionals from the transit agency, from consulting, from government, from NPOs, and we get together to talk about how best to implement asset management programs and write white papers as well as recommended practice. And some of the recent guidance we've published is about communicating asset management plans, really focusing on improving asset management through better asset information. For those of you familiar with the IAM, the Institute for Asset Management, and their kind of framework, we were looking at kind of applying aspects of that framework to transportation and transit in particular. And that's really what that second paper is about. And then we've had two recent ones about how to build stakeholder support, both internally and externally, for asset management. We're also working on some papers about software, as well as using asset criticality to make decisions, and then how to build an asset management team. And just a plug, I think these are papers that are broader and more relevant, not just to the transit industry, but also to the larger transportation industry. And then finally, some things that we're working on are more focused about continuous improvement. So looking particularly about incorporating risk and climate vulnerability into the asset management plans, and then about using condition assessments and predictive maintenance to drive performance, and then the link between asset management and safety. So thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. For our finale today, we're lucky to have Bob Hazlitt of Maricopa Association of Governments, also known as MAG. Bob is a senior engineer with MAG, the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Phoenix, Arizona region. He has more than 30 years of transportation engineering and planning experience in both public and private sector practices that include organization leadership and project management. At MAG, he provides policy planning for the deployment of automated travel and shared mobility services related to the MAG Regional Transportation Plan. While with MAG, he has managed the region's $10 billion regional freeway and highway program, conducted corridor master plans for Interstate 10, Interstate 17, and US 60 Grand Avenue, and the developed framework plans that established Interstate 11 in Arizona. Bob is a registered professional engineer in Arizona and 6 other states. He chairs the TRB Transportation Systems Policy Planning and Programming Committee section and represents MAG as an affiliate member of AASHTO and is a member of the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Now I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I'm hoping that my slides are going through, and I think they are. We practiced this, so hopefully we can move on with this. And I will apologize to the attendees on the line that some of this is going to have a little repetition over what some of the other presenters had. But I wanted to state that this was an amazing conference. And what I wanted to do was to give everybody an idea of how some of the planning for this conference began. A big part of it began back at the AASHTO Planning Conference in Spokane, Washington back in 2018, where there was a peer exchange on multimodal decision-making at the state and metropolitan and regional levels. Those documents are available online for their peer exchange, but there was a lot of information that came out of that helped set a lot of the stage, and also to some of the presenters that we had at the Atlanta conference. As a follow-up to that, last January at the 98th annual meeting of the Transportation Research Board, there was a section-wide session or workshop on multimodal decision making at the state and metropolitan levels that also set a lot of the stage for this particular conference. In all, before the conference even began, there was close to probably about 40 to 50 people that have kind of had their hands in terms of talking about the whole notion behind decision making, how to make things a little bit more mode neutral, and how to be able to work with performance measures as well as with data in terms of helping to advance decision making processes. And so again, there were a lot of stuff that came along before the conference that helped set the stage. As noted, there was a conference committee. There were 19 committee members and 4 people from TRB staff that helped with this particular conference. Some of the key people that helped out, besides Jordan, who was a track lead, as well as Trish Hedren and Matt Hardy that were mentioned before. But there was also help from Jerry Bohard with the Oregon DOT and Hannah Twaddell with ICF, and as well as with the conference co-chair, David Wasserman, with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. All these individuals help contribute and identify the majority of the presenters and the sessions that were pulled together for this. And so very special thank you to all of them. I can't go on too much further without, again, thanking many of our sponsors that we had for the project. For the conference. We had a fair number of folks that were that stepped up and helped out with this, and they helped. They also had exhibits at the conference too that people were able to go by and watch and listen and learn about different things that they could use to help advance their decision-making process. Matt already covered some of this with the plenaries and the and some of the other conference activities that happened. There was a poster session that was held during a welcome reception, excuse me, that allowed us to look at some recently completed and also some research that was underway. There was a second session that was held the second day of the conference that really talked about how data was changing the structure and role of public agencies. I had a really good panel that convened and talked about just the different things that are happening with data and how that data now, not just big data, but just even little bits and pieces of data is actually changing how people approach their decision-making process, as well as how they approach not only their programming, but also to their understanding of how they implement things through projects. There were several keynote speakers. The gentleman from MARTA was discussed at because of a lot of the stuff that he had done to help rescue MARTA. But there was also another gentleman that presented from UPS and talked about some of the ways that they use data. And he also had some very clever videos showing how they use that data to help make certain that those packages keep moving, because when one package gets stuck, it brings down pretty much the entire system. And so our keynote speakers, I thought were all very good. And again, Mr. Jackson talking about, take care of your employees and take care of yourself and your data certainly did resonate throughout the entire conference that was being held. And then one of the last sessions that we had was summarizing the conference by what we call putting it all together. And that's where all these track leads were met with the folks at the very end of the conference and talked to them about, some of the things and some of the big highlights that we saw. And that's what I'm going to focus on over these next few slides. As we did have these sessions, and Matt even showed one of the Wordles that we had, but we did have 3 of them active during the conference on each day to just get from folks, where they stood and where they stand. And so this Slido, there's other avenues that are available to do this, but we found that this was very helpful in terms of helping us kind of focus our discussions and help us to bring a lot of things to light. This was from the first day, where the biggest thing was learn. The second day, we asked what did they learn, and performance was the big thing that came out of that, but you can always see all the other points that were around there. And then finally, the last one that was identified that Matt had showed us that it was performance, project, governance, and data that all kind of came to the surface in terms of what people learned that they didn't learn before. And to Hannah's point, the reason Alan Alda is in there is that there was some discussion during the, I think it was the second day session, about how he has done some things. I guess he has a seminar or a workshop or some type of approaches. For those of you that don't know who Alan Alda is, he was a star of the long-running series MASH, and he's also a star of Screen and Stage. But he has a webinar, or a whole a way of training people to help them to become better presenters and to be able to take information and be able to get it out to different folks. And I think that was probably one of the other big takeaways from this conference is that there's many ways of being able to look at these conferences and being able to take the data that we have and be able to present it to not only to the public, but also just as importantly to transportation decision makers. Again, these are the tracks that were identified, but I'm going to go ahead and summarize at least some of the things that I saw that were some of the big highlights from the tracks. In the multimodal area, there was all about how data and performance measures were changing the development of actual transportation plans, not just and also studies for that matter, but there were a lot of presentations on both MPO and statewide plans, and how this whole effort with data and performance measures was actually changing how projects were selected to go into the plans, and how using the data allowed people to be able to make those investment decisions and be able to use those to be able to stand upon, if you will, so that there was a way and a process that was very methodical for people to be able to justify for things being a part of transportation plans. And so there were a total of 6 sessions that were done on multimodal planning, and there were a number of presentations on it. One of the things that I think was also very important was that there were sessions on transit by itself, and also expanding its effectiveness as shared mobility and automated transportation modes evolve, as Jordan was talking about earlier, with some of the declines that we've seen in public transportation ridership, that some of the shared mobility has started to creep into. And I think one of the things there was how can we work with those to be able to maybe help with first and last mile, or at the same time to be able to work together to be able to provide more public transportation to regions and to states. The next session was on performance and data, and this was again the one the track that Jordan led. Not to go over some of the stuff that she had talked about, but again, with business intelligence opportunities or BI opportunities and partnerships, there was a lot of discussion about bringing out some of the NCHRP 03-128 guidance, and also to just, again, how to work with private data as well as how to inform processes and governance. There was a lot of key takeaways, I believe, from there. And one of the things with the private data that I personally thought was interesting was again, this is private data that's being collected, but a lot of times they're using public facilities. And so how do you rationalize being able to use and get at that data to be able to help out your planning and programming efforts? I thought that was there were some very good points there. And again, privacy, I think, was one of the big things that kept creeping up into those discussions. Track C that was that David Wasserman had put together was on programming and investment prioritization. I think one of the most important things there was discussions about how to keep your programming as mode neutral as possible. In today's world, yes, you do have reasons that there should be maybe an improvement to a transit line, but yes, there should also be reasons for improving at a highway line. What happens when the two are kind of competing with each other, and where do you put your programming resources? And so there were several sessions that I saw on mode neutrality and how to work for that. But at the same time, it all kind of funneled back into that last bullet point that you see on this slide about political realities, and how that just factors into not only how you're working with your data and your performance measures, but it also influences, obviously, what gets reported and what actually gets done in terms of moving forward with your programming, as well as your prioritization of projects, as well as what investments you're going to make in your regional or your statewide transportation system and/or those systems. And then the last track that was put together by Hannah Twaddell developed a lot of information on communication and stakeholder engagement. I think the question that was with all this information, what are some effective tools for communicating transportation decisions? And there was a lot of presentations that did point towards elected official involvement and how to engage them, and how to keep the data as robust, as succinct though as possible, so that you're not doing certain things over and over again. But what I think was interesting was, and Matt had already shown this, was what was presented by Georgia DOT, how sometimes you can have fun with the data, and he was showing how Georgia DOT likes to use the turkey and the leftovers to talk about days that are good days for driving and not for driving, to get in and out of the Atlanta metro area on Thanksgiving. I thought that was very clever, and I think it points to that data does have a light side to it, and that sometimes through that light side of it, we can certainly get a lot of buy-in and a lot of participation. There was the whole thing on the WMATA case study that Jordan had alluded to earlier about fostering accountability for performance measures and measurements themselves. In fact, there was an entire session on the WMATA case study and how that was worked through and how it was implemented and some of the results from that. There were discussions on dashboards and their effectiveness and maybe how dashboards are starting to evolve with the different data sets that we're starting to see. And then there was also one session that was part of this track that really did look at some of the continuing research projects. It was a lightning round of about 8 individuals that talked about stuff that was happening at Federal Highway, at Federal Transit, AMPO, AASHTO, and TRB, and different parts of TRB and some of the continuing activities, so that participants had that information available to them to be able to help them move forward with some of their planning. Just some closing thoughts and some wrap up on this, just to kind of show how popular this conference was. A little over 350 attendees. I think we had probably planned for about 275, but we wound up with more, which is always good to see. And again, it was from throughout the United States, and then there were 3 countries represented, both the United States and Canada, and then there were a number of representatives from Japan and their railway that were there. And it was really interesting talking to them about how they use performance measurements to help with their system. Again, there were over 34 sessions with 120 plus presentations. There is an e-circular that's under development. Kate Lawson with the University of Albany is the one that's pulling that together. Every session that was had, including the plenary sessions and the lunch sessions, were all recorded. And there were also specific guidelines that we had for note takers. So that way we can make this e-circular, I think, as best as it possibly can be to help out with the findings and to help people look at information. As Matt had noted, if you go to TRB's website and you Google on this conference, you can pull up the conference agenda, and there are links in there to every one of the presentations that were made. Every one of them were kind of grabbed and captured from the folks that were there. So they are available online if you want to go back and take a look at them and maybe even look at some of the information on the slides and see if that has some applicability to some of the work that you're doing. A number of the TRB standing committees met, as well as a couple of the AASHTO committees also met during this time. It was really good to see that interaction with the actual conference itself, because there, again, different things are being looked at in terms of research on the TRB side, and I know that different things are being looked at from some of the policy implications on the AASHTO side. And I thought it was really great to be able to have those committee meetings there to be able to engage not just the members of these committees, but also to some of the participants on the conference to be able to sit in and learn and to find out what they can do to maybe help out with the profession. But then at the same time, too, and what I think is always very important when we have conference meetings or committee meetings, from either TRB or AASHTO or any other organization, that this gives people a way to expand their neighborhood a little bit, to be able to figure out what's in it for them, to be able to help move their practices forward, so that they can make better connections and better decisions in their professional practice. And then the last thing that was also happened the very last day of the conference, Federal Highway Administration had a workshop on the tool for investment decision making that was attended by roughly about 35 individuals. That happened that Wednesday afternoon to close out the conference. And I think by the time the entire conference was done, I think everybody was just was amazed at terms of the information they were able to take back to their professions. But I think at the same time too, I think they felt very good about that it was good information that was presented, and that there was very good topics that were held. They were timely, and at the same time too, I think they were very confident that stuff like the e-circular, as well as the having all the presentations on board, that allows people to be able to go back and look at it and be able to put it into practice themselves. And so thank you again, Yana. Thank you for having me be a part of this. And I hope that this information is helpful to those at the webinar. Again, we hope that this conference is the start of a continuing dialogue in data as well as in performance measures, and that it will help us all make better decisions about our transportation system.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that presentation. So that concludes our presentations for today. Thank you to all the attendees and of course all of the presenters. Now it's time for the Q&A session. So if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A feature of the webinar toolbar. So there's a question from Raj Alani, and I think this is a question for Matt Hubrick's presentation, but maybe others who were at the session might be able to answer it too. What criteria were used to quantify the transportation values in Vermont's efficient frontier graph? Matt, you might be mute.
Yeah, I was on mute. Sorry about that. That's a great question. So I pulled that slide out, and I don't have Chad's slide deck in front of me. I think there is a link in my presentation to that presentation that Chad gave, or you can also, if you Google up the program for the conference, you should be able to get a link to that presentation. I think you'll find those details there. I'll see if I can quickly find it while we're talking here, but that would be your best bet, would be to contact Chad Allen at VTrans, and I'm sure they'd be able to give you some insights into exactly what the scoring rubric included.
Okay, Matt, you can look, and I can ask the next question. This is a question for all of you. So what was your sense of the importance and or urgency of asset data and performance versus other transportation data and performance, such as safety and mobility? I'm just curious, what was the vibe you felt in the sessions and the conversations you had while you were there? Let's start with Jordan, if you have a comment.
I felt that the asset data and performance came up a bit more when talking about kind of project prioritization and selection. But more broadly, we had a lot of examples, particularly on the transit side, of using data more to make kind of on the ground operational decisions. So about, how to allocate your non-revenue fleet, about, absenteeism, about that kind of thing. So I think in the sessions I went to, it was a little more balanced away from asset data, but I think that was in part just the topics.
Bob, how about you?
Certainly, there was a lot of discussion, but I think I'm going to echo a lot of what Jordan said too. That it seemed to me that a lot of time the asset discussion really came up in actual projects themselves. I mean, I'm going to go back to some of the stuff that I saw on the public transportation side, and of course, the condition of vehicles and the condition of the rails, or the condition of you name it. Did come up in a lot of discussions, or presentations. But what I thought was interesting is that there was this marrying, of taking the assets themselves and its condition, and also taking it and seeing, okay, how does that work with specific measurements in terms of reliability or travel times or VHT, VMT, whatever you wanted to go there. And there I was expanding from just public transportation, but also to some of the other modes of transportation. And so what I thought was interesting was how some places now are starting to marry those things together, and that I think that is an area that I think a lot of people are kind of moving towards. And with these large data sets that we have available, it only makes that type of marrying, if you will, much more possible.
Steve, how about you?
How I looked at it was, I heard asset management mentioned a lot. But they say, yes, with our asset management program, etc. But I saw, like Jordan Bob mentioned, it was performance management more like for selection, not for allocation to a program. for those of you who know me, one thing stuck in my mind really was the scoring that some MPOs were talking about. And it said in the scores for the pavement and bridge condition, and I said, is that leading to worse first, or is that strategic management of the assets? And they really didn't get into that because they were focused on the safety, the congestion, and that sort of thing. So I'd say it was great having the conversation. They are talking about asset management, but we have room to grow. Well, that was my takeaway.
Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree with that, with Steve's comments. I think the other thing that I kind of highlighted this in a couple of the presentations that I showcased in my presentation, but the idea of, are there ways that we can kind of put things on a little bit more of a level playing field? And I really like the way that Matt was kind of looking at things in terms of kind of using that state of good repair as an idea of an equalizer to look across different types of assets and thinking about, how can we kind of compare the different investments that we have on these very different types of assets that we are charged with maintaining. So, I think there's a lot of work still to be done in that field and in that area, and we have, in many cases, a lot of data, but it's sort of how do we bring everything together and synthesize it and put everything on kind of a common playing field so that we can have a set of objectives that we can all kind of agree towards.
So one last question or comment, request for a comment. My observation was that part of the buzz around the conference was around new tools, data sets, and strong communication examples. And in some ways, those are the shiny new things that excite people at an event like that. I'm curious on your view of that element of the conference married against kind of what we need to do, the hard work of actually improving the way we make decisions in agencies so that we actually deliver the performance needed. Who wants to go first? Bob, I'm gonna call on people.
I'm sorry, I had to reach my mute button for a moment. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of truth in that in that comment. I think trying to ensure that the performance management that is actually met, or those performance measures are met in terms of what you're programming is a totally, I don't want to say a new way, but it is a different way of looking at things. In that, again, a lot of times when we seem to put these projects together and stuff, we're all, saying that, yeah, this will improve things. This will maybe help out, with maybe something that's congested, or maybe it'll improve something that, from a maintenance standpoint that needed to be replaced and all that type of stuff. But I think the other part of it that I will go back to, and I think again I'll look at some of the stuff that that Matt had highlighted from El Paso and what they were doing down there, is that they were very much working towards making certain that their plans would yield specific performance measurements, and I thought that was a very striking way of taking a look at things.
Anybody else want to comment?
I'll comment. This is Jordan. I found that the conference to be kind of a good balance between shiny new things and then actual practical examples of how people are implementing these things. One example is business intelligence, which sometimes sounds like a fancy word, but really, there were examples of kind of 3 different models people are pursuing. Nebraska DOT has consultants on call to do data-driven analysis. I think Maryland has kind of consolidated a group of data analysts and developed BI tools kind of in one unit that then serves other customers throughout the agency, and then others are kind of trying to incorporate it more locally. So I found that, just one example of kind of how there was practical applications of these broader ideas.
Thanks, Jordan. Matt or Steve, do you guys want to comment?
I thought, going back to a slide that either Matt or Jordan showed earlier, it was having the data tell a story. And I think that's important. Great. We're a couple years in, we're doing asset management and the performance management. What's the message we're trying to communicate? Looking at where we are today, the particular measures, what story can you tell on? It's like an interim target of where we're headed. Are we headed there? How can we communicate that? How can you tell the bigger picture? I also sat back and thought, okay, we have the pavement condition or the safety measure. Is there a measure that really communicates that, the asset management? Some of us have talked about the life of pavement, remaining service life or something. Or is the asset value? Sometimes we hear the people from Canada or Australia, Europe, talk about the value of our network is X, and it's increasing, or because of a lack of funds, it's really going down. Is there a measure that pertaining to the asset management that would make it easier as a metric when doing scoring, et cetera, that we should consider more? And I know Federal Highway out at Turner Fairbank is doing some research on that, the next generation of measures. I think that way of communicating, I think that was a big takeaway I had.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Matt, did you want to comment?
I'm not sure if I have anything to add beyond what the other panelists have already mentioned. I mean, I think one thing that still resonates with me as we think about all different kinds of data that we have in our agencies, we tend to, this has been almost cliche, to say that we're information or data-rich, information poor, right? So, in some cases, it's not that we need more data, it's that we need better ways to kind of think about what stories that data is trying to tell us and how we can better utilize it to help inform our decision making. And as a long time kind of data geek, it pains me to say it a little bit, but in some cases, I think maybe we need to think very carefully about whether we really need any additional data to help us make decisions, or are we getting the maximum value out of the data that we've already collected. And I think that during this conference, we saw a number of examples of some great opportunities, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done with what we already have.
Thanks, Matt. That's a great comment, and all of our presenters and your thoughtful input into all of our wish to continue to strengthen asset management and how we use data to drive better performance. So we're out of time for the Q&A, and just want to close by saying that the next webinar will be held in 2 months on December 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the topic will be on TAM consistency review process. I think many of you are going to be interested in hearing more about that. Additional webinars will be continuing for quite a while. Please send ideas for the webinars you'd like to see. And just a final reminder, for more information, you can visit tam-portal.com. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to our panelists. Goodbye.